I remember where it was when Lexa, spoiler alert,
Ah!
died.
Oh, I'm gonna fall out of my chair.
Yeah, like I
What's your story? What's your sign? It's like we're twin flames in a different life.
My name is Kelsey. I am a Master's of Anthropology student here in Lethbridge, Alberta. I am a queer Filipina Canadian and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Alissa Takahashi. My pronouns are they, she. I'm a teacher in Edmonton, Alberta, which is located on Treaty 6 territory.
Yeah, and I'm on Treaty 7 territory. If you're comfortable, would you want to share maybe some of your coming out story with me?
I mean, looking back on it, I was like, obviously. I know that's not everyone's experience, but that's definitely mine. I was raised Mormon. Being queer was definitely not a thing. When I was in junior high, I definitely started like feeling attraction towards girls. And then in high school, I was like, oh, I feel like it maybe is more, but I was like really suppressing things. I had a lot of internalized homophobia. I graduated, I got into my first serious relationship with a boy, and I was like, okay, like he's nice.
He's cool.
Mormon, well, there was never that, at least in this circumstance, because Mormons aren't supposed to have sex until they're married. So it's like that wasn't even on the table. Then I bumped into someone that I went to high school with, and I was like, wow, I'm in love with her. I guess I got to deal with those feelings. I came out when I was 18, and it was not a fun time. My family was definitely not supportive at the time. A lot of the friends that I'd grown up with were Mormon, and so they were supportive in the sense that like they still talked to me.
Did you get like the kind of like the Christian love where it's like, we love you, but not the lifestyle, like love you, but not the sin?
Absolutely. A lot of, yeah, it's a lifestyle choice. And at that time, I think again, like a lot of people, I was like, well, maybe I'm bisexual because I don't hate men.
I don't like them, but I don't hate them.
Exactly. And there's a lot of like content there. And so I was like, probably just, and not a phase, but like maybe I could still love a man one day. So the first like year and a bit was like pretty brutal, but I had an amazingly supportive partner and her family was super supportive. Now we're engaged. So, right. And then my family really came around and now are some of our biggest supporters.
That's beautiful though, because I didn't grow up Mormon, but I really relate a lot to that experience. I grew up like Baptist Christian, like, ooh, we were in it, honey. It's certainly not a fun time to come out as gay when you were a teenager. To hear that your family has come that full circle moment and is supportive of you, like, I'm just so happy for you because that's very rare, I find.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. Yeah. I don't think that my dad cared as much as my mom did. And I think that also really came from like Mormon culture of like any like failings in the family are on the mom. And so yeah, and so I think that she really felt like it would be a reflection of her. And I also think that she was really worried about what that would mean for my life. I still lived at home. I was lucky in the sense that I wasn't kicked out, but my mom and I hardly spoke for a year. And my mom and I were pretty close. And so that was rough. And now she fully like educated herself. We've like sat down, she apologized to myself and my partner on like multiple occasions. And we're just at this place now where we have really good boundaries and we have like really healthy ways of communicating. Last Pride, she like bought us this cake from a local bakery that was like,
Mom.
Right? Yeah. Patricia's like nailing it now.
Yeah, go allyship. That's what we want to see.
Exactly, yeah.
And when you talk about like safety and society, that is such an interesting thing that I didn't expect to relate to you on, because when I came out to my mother, that was one of the first concerns that she had. She was obviously like, you know, crying and it was very dramatic, like a telenovela. Yeah. But she said the first thing was like, just be safe. Like it's going to be harder for you out in the world. Moms, it's tough, especially if you already maybe have a challenging relationship like I did with my mother.
But I also think because we did have I grew up in such conservative circles that I think that's kind of what she was talking about too.
For me, it was very much also a very conservative religious family, but I think also culturally for my mother, it was very difficult because she's, you know, my father is Canadian and my mother is Filipina. In the Philippines, it's very much like, at least from what I've learned with my family, like a stigmatized thing and not approved and very socially conservative. So I think it was that extra bit of challenge for her too.
It was interesting because once I came out and years passed and things like that, I asked my mom, because my paternal grandfather passed away when I was a kid. My paternal grandmother she has Alzheimer's. They're the Japanese side of the family. And so I knew that my mom, like her mom, would have been like so supportive, super liberal nanny, just like rocking it in the like 80s. And so my mom was like, Nanny would have been so proud of you. And so I was like, how do you think like Grandma and Grandpa Takahashi would have reacted? And she was like, honestly, not well. And I was like, yeah, like that, like we don't talk about feelings. Like, why would you be personal? Like, no one needs to know that.
It's giving very, we don't talk about Bruno, you know, like we just don't cross that line. And like even my Lolo and my Lola, like my Filipino grandparents, they don't know. And I probably will not have that conversation with them unless like I'm getting married.
Well, again, like my grandma has Alzheimer's and I'm still like, I shouldn't tell her because what if that's the one thing she remembers? Like, I don't want
Exactly. Oh my goodness, it's the same. I'm like, I don't want to give my Lola a heart attack and then just like be the blame. It's kind of funny to joke about now because I don't have like a serious partner, but if I did, I could imagine that would be kind of like, ugh.
It's like an interesting thing, like navigating with my partner. Like she was, her grandparents, she was unsure of how to come out to them. Like they knew that I was her roommate. And exactly.
Okay, honey. Very classic LGBT of you.
And then when she decided to come out to them, it was like I wouldn't have wanted to be in her shoes. But I was just like, I'm glad I don't have any grandparents that I would like need to come out to.
It's tricky with those family dynamics in general, but especially when you have like generational values that maybe don't translate between each other.
Well, and then also like when I came out to my family and then my friends and stuff like that, I was like, whew, don't need to do that again. That was fantastic. And now it's like every day, like there's so many coming out. We do as a society still just expect that people are cis and straight.
Like I even had another interview where I talked with another person about this, and that's what she said. She was like, I didn't realize when I first came out that I would end up coming out inadvertently like every single day of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, well, if I come out as bi, that still gives me some wiggle room, and not understanding at that point sexuality is a spectrum and these are the ones we have and we do the best that we can. But I honestly found it like more confusing for people if I said I was bi, because there's so much biphobia. Even when I would like identify as gay or queer, people would sometimes be like, oh, this is Alissa, she's a lesbian. And I'd be like, I've never used that word for myself. There's times where I'm like, I don't know what I am. Really had to unpack like homophobia I had around the term lesbian. Because growing up, like that was like a bad word. And so I was like, I don't want to be a lesbian. That seems bad. But I was like, no offense to lesbians. And like it's been this whole journey that I feel like I'm still kind of working through.
It's interesting that you say that because again, I've done I think 4 or 5 interviews at this point, and it's interesting to see like the overlap in between queer experiences. How I feel about the term lesbian is like, I'm so okay if other people use it and if they proudly reclaim it. But just in my own experience, I've had a lot of like really uncomfortable or unwarranted or dangerous experiences with honestly straight men fetishizing me or my partner at the time. And so whenever I hear that term for myself, I just get that kind of like, really don't like it.
Well, I think that also plays into like the Asianness too, because like, especially with like Asian women, it's like, there's so much fetishization where Asian men are almost like desexualized. And then when you throw in a term like lesbian, that for some reason is still so hypersexualized.
And like touching on that like piece about Asian fetishization, oh my god, like my whole experience as like a mixed woman of color has really just been like being exoticized and tokenized by people, and it's just such an uncomfortable thing because it's always meant as if it's a compliment, right? And it's never a compliment. I'm like, why would this borderline, if not microaggressive racist thing you're telling me, be nice?
Right. And also like sexual harassing, like all of those things. Anytime that a white man is like, oh, your last name, I'm like, ooh, this is a red flag. I think when people when they want to perceive me as white, they perceive me as white. When they want to perceive me as Asian, they do. I'm half, and I don't know that I look that Asian, and I like definitely have like very light skin, a lot of white passing privilege, but I find it's the people who want to see it do, whether they're like white or Asian. So weird.
Oh man, and I find like I'm just like lighting up, not at your experiences right now, but at the fact that I find maybe you feel the same way, that At my age, I'm 25, I haven't really met that many people that are like mixed at my age. I find that there's a lot of kids nowadays that are mixed, it seems, so there's like community there. But growing up, I really felt like the odd one out. My life experience walking through the world as two things instead of one was something that to this day, people just don't understand.
Yes, absolutely. Mormons across the board are very white.
And I can imagine.
Yeah, and there's a small kind of pocket of Japanese Mormons because of the Japanese population in southern Alberta and the Mormon population in southern Alberta. I definitely knew I wasn't white, but everyone around me was white, and like my mom's white. And so it was like this really weird, like, I really felt this need to hold on to my like Japanese culture, but my family isn't really culturally Japanese. And so like I'm third generation born in Canada. And so we're like pretty white. But then, yeah, I felt this need to like prove my Asianness. But then around Asian people, I was like, there's no way that I stand up to like actually being Asian. My fiance is a quarter Indian. When we like started dating and things like that, we were talking about our experiences. It was interesting because she was like, you were the like non-white person in your friend group, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, like that's how white it was that I was the not white. It was just really interesting that even like internalized racism that I had, like our experiences are very different because when I grew up here, being Japanese wasn't necessarily like a bad thing. Definitely when my dad grew up and when my grandparents grew up, being Japanese was bad. Whereas when she grew up being Indian here, like post 9/11, it's been an interesting experience dating someone else or being in a relationship with someone else who is like a person of color.
I totally hear you and feel and resonate when you talk about like growing up surrounded in whiteness and feeling like you were white, even though ethnically and how we feel on the inside and the way the world still treats us doesn't agree with that idea, that baseline of whiteness. I remember even having like friends as siblings make comments about like same thing, like thinking I was Indigenous, so they didn't want to say anything racist about Indigenous peoples, but then said racist things about Asian people. And then it was like, it's bad either way.
Yes.
And then not even like registering that as problematic because I understood myself at that time to be like a white person moving through the world. I didn't get it.
Well, no, that's a lot to unpack like as a kid. I was very aware that I was Japanese. And like my sister used to be like, dude, you know, we're white too. I felt like I needed to be one and that I couldn't be both because I didn't really know what being both looked like. And it's still something that I'm unpacking. And I remember my fiance asking me like, do you identify as biracial? And I was like, yes, but I've never thought of that. Like I've only ever thought of biracial as someone who's Black and mixed.
Wow.
And I was like, that is a lot.
How do I see myself as moving through the world, but also how does the world see me? Absolutely. And sometimes those views don't line up. But one thing that I've really kind of been coming to terms with in reclaiming my cultural identity as an adult is like, when you talk about being authentically Asian, like, oh, I'm not authentically Japanese and I don't know the culture. I think that's something a lot of like, regardless of whether you're mixed, a lot of kids that were immigrating or grew up in a different country from the one that they were born in, they all kind of feel that way because you're displaced from the home country, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think how I kind of understand it is like there is Filipino identity as in the Philippines, but then there's also Filipino Canadian identity as what is in Alberta, and then add in the layer of being mixed on top of it.
It's so complex, which is so beautiful, but also can be really isolating, even though there's so many people going through the same thing.
Man, I'm just so happy to connect with you and like even be able to have somebody to talk about this kind of stuff, you know, because I find that just with like my POC friends in general, it's like I can talk about things with them that are just instantly understood that I cannot with my like white friends, for example, which is no harm on my white friends. It's just life experience is different. And then there's just that other level of, you know, being mixed that is an even smaller pool of people that you can then connect with.
Like even a few years ago when art language started evolving and we were referring to people of color and things like that, like I remember having a lot of conflict with that myself. If I was like, I guess technically I am a person of color, but I feel like my color is white. Like, I experienced a lot of microaggressions, which still suck, but the number of like actual racist experiences that I've faced are very minimal. And so I even felt kind of strange occupying spaces for people of color, still acknowledging, I guess, the privilege that I have.
When you talk about, being lighter skinned and maybe experiencing more so microaggressions, I also relate to that quite a bit. I unfortunately have, and my brother also has had not fun things happen. But for the majority, it's that like inconvenience, that awkwardness, rather than something that's threatening to me. I do want to like be that soundboard for you in this moment to say that I totally think you have a seat at the table, because the fact that you even have these microaggressions happening to you, that wouldn't happen if you were fully white. I understand that kind of hesitancy and not wanting to take up space that you feel belongs to others. I think with sensitivity, we both definitely have a seat at the table.
I love the way that you worded that, and thank you so much for that.
I actually had a really deep conversation with my former roommate. She's one of my best friends, amazing, funny individual who I think could probably be on Saturday Night Live someday. Like, she's incredible. And she's also a Black woman. And so I said the exact same thing where I was like, I don't know if I feel like I can take up space. And she was one of the first people to kind of validate me and say, no, you have a seat at the table because this is who you are. So I'm offering the same to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really cool because these things are starting to be talked about more, especially like in Hollywood, there being more Asian representation by actual Asian actors as opposed to like white
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, exactly. And Emma Stone. Under white supremacy, none of us benefit. And then trying to find the hierarchy within white supremacy also doesn't benefit anyone.
You know how sometimes people be like, why do you always have to talk about being gay? It's the same thing, I think, with POC culture and identity.
Also, Alberta is a very interesting environment to be anything other. I don't know that I necessarily recognized that growing up. I grew up in a small town, but we moved back to the city when I was like 9.
Okay.
And
Good
so,
for you.
Right, thank you. I think it wasn't until I was a teenager, I was more exposed to like the outside world that I realized like how conservative Alberta is. And then growing up in a conservative community within Alberta, realizing that, yeah, people in other places in Canada don't have the same experience.
I think every kind of queer person had that era when they were a teenager and they made tons of gay friends on the internet because they just felt so alone. And I just remember like hearing about my queer friends in like LA, for example, and their experiences of just being so free and open versus here. It was just such like a groundbreaking, earth-shattering thing for me to be like, hello, I am not straight. I look like this.
This idea of like proving your queerness, I think has a really big impact, especially in Alberta as well. Like everyone's wearing jeans and plaid, and so there's like this weird like intersection too of identity of like butch lesbians. It's like, but do they just work in the oil field?
I think I just had like the 7 layers of grief just like washed over me as you were talking about that. I am here to yassify my wardrobe. Like, no,
exactly. No. Yeah. Once I was wearing like a very queer outfit, and they were like, oh, that's really grunge, and I was like, yes, but also
go get it, go make it.
Thank you. Yes.
Like, I've even been admiring your Patagonia sweater. Where did you get that? Purgatory, yeah. So I love the show Winona Earp. Yes. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and so this is like my Winona Earp sweater.
Oh my God, that's sensational. I got distracted there by your sweater. It was just so fabulous. Just, did you have any maybe representation growing up of what queerness or your experience looked like in Alberta and Edmonton?
Right? No. There was one guy, Brian, and he was Mormon, or like his family was Mormon. He left the church and he had a partner, and it was like they were like the one gay couple that like my entire family knew and they would like reference. But he was like the only like real life queer person. There was Brian, and then there was Ellen DeGeneres. They were somehow on the same level of like existing to me.
Go Brian.
Right?
Next to Ellen, are you joking?
Right. Well, and now obviously he's surpassed her. Then the only representation that I had like was media, A Shot at Love with Tila Tequila, that I was not allowed to watch, but I like would sit with like my finger on the remote. We weren't allowed to watch Friends. We weren't allowed to watch The Simpsons. Like there were a lot of weird shows that I don't know why we couldn't watch. I remember when Glee became popular and I really loved the show, but then Kurt's storyline started to take off. I was so against the show. And like when Santana and Brittany started like being a thing, because I was so worried that I would be found out. I was like, if I like this show, people are going to think that's gay. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of representation. And then any representation that I did see of queerness, people didn't look like me. They didn't have my experience. And I felt the need to like distance myself from it.
You really think about how much representation has changed, even in the last 10 years. All of the examples of positive representation we have in media, in film and television. When I was growing up, it was like every lesbian on television is going to kiss, get shot, and die.
Like, I remember where it was when Lexa, spoiler alert.
I'm gonna fall out of my chair.
Yeah, like I was on Tumblr because it didn't come onto Netflix until like 1 a.m. here, and I was like scrolling, about to go to bed, and all I kept seeing was like Alexa had died, and I was like, are these people must know it? That can't. So I stayed up till 1, watched the episode, cried my face off, posted about it, and then I had like class the next day. Like I was in university, like I was too old, but this was the only queer representation I had. I stopped watching the show. Like I was so upset. And so when Winona Earp became a thing, I knew it was filmed in Alberta and all these things, and I was like, I'm not putting myself through that. I realized it came out in 2016, like right when all this had happened, and Emily Andrus, like the creator, had said that she would not kill off her queer characters. She was like, I'm not here to like queer bait you or like murder your representation. Well, that show is like extremely white, and like everyone is able-bodied and like very skinny. One of the first shows that I watched where there were queer people that didn't die.
Right? No, absolutely. And I think there's a really funny moment in Winona Earp where Nicole in season 1 like gets shot, and then they're like, bulletproof vest. Haven't you heard of that? And that was just like, bam, in the face of every other TV lesbian that had died via gunshot, you know?
Yeah, and that moment is like, every time it happens still, I have like this visceral reaction where I'm like, she's dead. And then now there's like so many fantastic shows. I'm a teacher, and so is my fiance, and so we try to like watch like younger shows so we can talk to our students about it. We'd like heard about She-Ra and we hadn't watched it. Like there are literally episodes where I've like cried during, because Glimmer is canon Asian, like mixed.
Yep.
Everyone who voices an Asian character is Asian, which again should not be mind-blowing. But there's so much just like subtle queer representation throughout that show. Like if I had watched this as a kid,
life different. Yeah.
Game changer.
And it's so funny because you're like, my fiance and I were teachers. That's why we watch this children's program. And then me, I'm like, I'm a master's of anthropology student that is just gay and needs representation. So I binged all of that in my undergrad just for funsies.
Absolutely. And like saying that we're teachers, that's the like subtle guys of like, and that's why we watch this.
No, you watched it because you're queer and we're all in the same boat. You bringing up Lexa, it just, I think, is a testimony to how profoundly like bad that was. If what is it, like 8 years later, I hear her name and I almost fall out of my chair. I think I did the same thing, like posting an Instagram post about how devastated I was. Like, you know, did I need to do that? No, but did I do it anyway? Yes.
But did you need to do that? Yes.
Yeah, it was, I think, so hard hitting because so many of us felt seen in this character. Like she was a badass. She was this leader and strong and gorgeous and powerful. I honestly think it was kind of like a cultural reset moment because of how bad it blew up. And so hopefully it seems like since then it hasn't like, I haven't seen any equivalent of that.
That was, I don't even know if I can speak to that.
Oh, I know. And what was it like to come out in Alberta?
Oh, not fun. My fiance and I, like, we came out roughly around the same time and we had vastly different experiences. There are definitely times where we both felt like very unsafe. When I came out, I was like super femme presenting. And if we would like hold hands, like we were waiting to cross the street across like Calgary Trail or like Gateway Boulevard, which are like big streets. We were holding hands and I think we maybe kissed. Car like honked at us and like flipped us off, and they were going like 60 down the street, and we were both just like, oh, Right. There were definitely times where we would say like, okay, are we going to hold hands walking to the restaurant? Do we feel comfortable doing this? Or like, just like really quick check-ins too. And we just kind of have this unwritten rule of like, we're not PDA people, also because it is kind of a safety thing. There are certain times where we would just like drop hands and we both knew why. We never talked about it, but it was just that kind of like, oh, right, like this is where we are. It would be like Canada Day and we'd kiss and someone would be like, don't do that in front of my kid. And we'd be like, I'm so sorry. Like the more aggressive side has always been men, predominantly white, also because we're in Alberta. And then a lot more of the microaggressions come from women, again, always white. Like my fiance and I have had very different experiences. She's very femme and the way that we experience things is very differently. Like I am not sexualized by any man because clearly
not for you.
No, and they seem to respect that. Now that I am presenting less feminine, I feel like we don't get as many comments, which is
interesting.
Because I think again, it's like they can see us and they can place in their mind which one's like the boy, and so. Absolutely. And the number, that's a whole thing. I think most people read me female. I think because it's like, well, one has short hair and one has long hair. So it's okay. If they both have long hair, I don't know what to do. If they both had short hair, that's illegal.
It really just shows how entrenched gender norms are. To have to delineate something in terms of this one has short hair, this one has long hair in order to understand it and make space for it. Honey, let's broaden those horizons.
I now am kind of figuring out my gender identity and like I find a lot of comfort in like the term non-binary. Before I even started on that journey at all, I was misgendered as male at least once a month. And this is even when I had like super long hair and people would call me sir like all the time. I always felt like super uncomfortable with it. Not that someone thought I was a man, but like safety wise, I was always really worried if they realize that they've made a mistake and that I'm a woman, am I now unsafe? Then once I had short hair and were wearing masks a lot more, like it happens all the time. The interesting thing though is I teach junior high, so like 12 to like 14, 15-year-olds. They do not care about people's gender or sexuality, which is amazing. And but the number of kids who defend my pronouns before I even have a chance to. And this year I was like, I don't really want the kids to call me Miss Takahashi because I'm not a miss, but I'm not a huge fan of the term mix for myself. I'm just gonna have them call me just by my last name. I'm just Takahashi. But the grade 8 kids this year, I taught them last year. And so a lot of them were used to calling me Miss Takahashi. There's this one kid, he's like taking it upon himself that when anyone in the class calls me Miss Takahashi, he goes, actually it's Takahashi. I just love that. And it's so sweet. And it's just one of those things of, again, like I'm a fully grown adult. And that means so much to me that like a child is standing up for me.
Doesn't that just absolutely speak to how much of this is learned behavior and socialization?
Absolutely.
It so speaks to the power of education and culture and language around all of these things. So when people really be like, gender, like it has to be this way, clearly not, because there's a whole generation underneath you that just gets it.
And it gives me a lot of hope. Like it's so awesome.
It makes me feel good too to see, because I'll just be very honest and transparent. Like even I will find myself, like if I have a friend that's non-binary something, sometimes I'll accidentally slip up and be like she and immediately correct, right? And it's tough to break past that, even though I'm in full support of people using whatever language they want to identify. It's just when you've been encultured in this world that says there's only male and female, even if you don't agree with it, it can still come out.
Oh, absolutely, all the time. And I feel like that's still something like that I'm breaking for myself. Like when I refer to myself, I misgender myself all the time.
What would you like to say to maybe queer Albertans who feel the same struggles that you did or experiences that you went through growing up?
I think just that there is a community here. I know that a lot of us have, like found family, people we've met on the internet, things like that. But that there are queer people wherever you are. If you meet them over the internet, that doesn't mean that that friendship is any less valid. I don't have like a huge community of queer people around me here, but I do have like 3 or 4, like other than my partner, people who are so queer and who grew up here, and they just get it. And that connection is so much stronger.
There are beautiful things about Alberta outside of these stereotypes and these ugly things that can affect people like us daily. One of the main reasons I wanted to start this project is because I wanted that narrative to change, even in the smallest way, because we're here too, and we have stories and lives that are beautiful and vibrant outside of those things.
When I saw your TikTok, I was so excited because so often I'm on TikTok and I'm like, wow, things are really great in LA where all the queer YouTubers live together and like they're popping off. And then I was like, oh my goodness, you're Albertan and you're queer. This is amazing. And I was like, I want to reach out because that is such a specific intersection. I never really thought about it. If this exists, it means there's more queer Albertans.
Exactly.
And that's exciting. The more people whose voices are uplifted, the greater the chance that someone will see someone who looks like them. And that's so important.
This is actually the last question. If you could go back in time and tell your younger self something from the present, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, you're gonna make me cry now. Jeepers. I didn't realize that I could be happy. A really big thing in the Mormon church is that the only way to have true happiness is through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And that was echoed back to me so many times. And even when I came out, I had friends who said, like, we support you, but like, it breaks my heart that you'll never be truly happy. Cool, thanks. And then I think back to how I felt when I was a part of the church, and I was not happy. I was pretending all the time and suppressing this amazing part of myself. I came out almost 10 years ago and left the church, and I'm getting married to the most amazing woman, and we're getting a house together, and we're creating this beautiful life. I have a job. The number of times I catch myself just like grinning like an idiot, and my fiance's like, what are you doing? And I say to her, like, I'm so happy. Like, even though the world is a mess, but I can't get over the fact that I did not think that I would ever be happy. And so if I could go back and tell myself one thing, it would be that you're gonna be happy one day.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that with me. That is so beautiful. And I think in itself, like, it's so important that people hear that. You are a queer person in Alberta, genderqueer, non-binary, figuring yourself out and living your life authentically and fully, and you are happy and you are successful. And that is something that even me, sometimes I'm like, I haven't seen a lot of happy queer couples or old queer couples. Not speaking about you though, you're not old.
No, absolutely.
I'm thinking like elderly. And so to hear that you have that and you're here in Alberta, like, that is so inspiring. So you should feel just so lucky, and I'm so genuinely happy for you.
Thank you so much. When I was a kid and I pictured my life, I pictured myself like with a husband and kids and all that, because that's all I knew.
Exactly.
There was a big chunk of my life, and even now, where I don't know what my future looks like. And like, even my fiance and I have talked about, like, what are we going to look like when we're old together?
Right.
Like, what does that look like? What does being an elderly lesbian couple in Alberta look like?
I haven't seen it.
Right. And so some of it is exciting because we get to make it up as we go and figure out what the heck that looks like. But it can be really isolating. And so celebrating those like small victories of normalcy, but within being queer, has become one of my favorite things. We have a fish. Straight people have fish, and like, we have a fish, and that's awesome. Like,
I love that. Yeah. Deep stuff, my friend.
Hey, oh my goodness.
Thank you so much for being in the space with me today, and for just being so honest and sharing your story.
Oh, thank you. I feel exactly the same way.